Alrighty, guys. Really appreciate all the viewership. We had a lot of views post NFL Combine, right? And one of the big news that has happened in college football, as a lot of this coaching news is kind of coming to a close, and we might still on the show go out there and review the New Orleans Saints, the Jaguars, Chicago Bears, like some of the really interesting coaching staffs, even the New York Jets. Like a lot of these are new NFL coaching staffs. But in college football, it's really been the infusion of general managers. And we had Chad Bowden leave the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and already USC has reaped the benefits. They got a great defensive lineman from Santa Margarita, California. They also got Jonas Williams committed. He was an Oregon recruit. They flipped him in that process. And I think that Chad Bowden and Jen Cohen, the athletic director, are helping Lincoln Riley try to achieve his full on potential. But one of the biggest movers in this GM world is Oklahoma ends up hiring the director of the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy. Now, Jim Nagy went to Michigan. He was born, I believe, outside of Detroit. And he went to Michigan, and then he worked for the Green Bay Packers for a couple of years, Ron Wolf and that staff. And then he ended up going to New England. So he ended up spending a lot of time, I guess, around Tom Brady, around Nick Caserio, around Elliott Wolf and that team, and he saw the seriousness of that building and of the New England Patriots. And then he went up with John Schneider and Pete Carroll towards the back half of the 2010s and towards the mid-2010s, and Jim Nagy's been responsible for winning Super Bowl championships. And Jim Nagy had quite big shoes to fill when he took over for, didn't mean to say it as a pun, but Phil Savage. Phil Savage ended up, I believe, going back to the NFL, and Phil Savage wanted a more relaxed role than running the Senior Bowl. Phil Savage was great at running the Senior Bowl. Jim Nagy learned under Phil Savage and eventually took over the Reese's Senior Bowl in Mobile. Reese's. So Jim Nagy has a wealth of NFL experience and a wealth of putting together college prospects for the Senior Bowl. He knows how to run a cap situation. He has very good relationships with agents. And Oklahoma here, with Ben Arbuckle, John Mateer, and now with Jim Nagy, they are really putting forth a full-on, full-court press into the new era of college football. So we have some pretty popular GMs that are out there, like James Blanchard at Texas Tech is somebody that had one of the best recruiting hauls. James Blanchard is somebody that at Texas Tech, he helped, bring in some of the best transfer portal acquisitions. Like Texas Tech is a great transfer portal outfit. We also have Brandon Harris, who played quarterback at LSU. He's actually the Texas GM at just 29 years old. So GMs are taking over college football now, as Josh Pate articulated and as other people articulated. GMs at certain schools are going to have very minimal power, and they're just going to be essentially like part of the recruiting, part of watching tape, part of the recruiting alignment. But at some other schools, the GMs are actually going to be more connected to the athletic director than some coaches. And here for Jim Nagy, we understand that with Brent Venables has had like some real mediocre seasons in Norman. I mean, he had a good 10-win year, but then the first couple of years, even in Big 12 play, left a lot to be desired there. And Jackson Arnold ended up being a miss for Brent Venables, and that offense ended up being an absolute mess. And their schedule's going to be pretty damn tough next year. So for Brent Venables, he does need to win there, or he is on kind of a hot seat, and Jim Nagy's first getting started. And it's been pointed out there that if Brent Venables and this offense really doesn't work with Ben Arbuckle and with John Mateer, and they don't end up winning 7 or 8 games, like there is a possibility that Brent Venables will not, be the head coach in Norman for a pretty long time. But Jim Nagy is just joining, and Jim Nagy, could end up picking the next coach. So Jim Nagy is not tied to the Venables' success. So we're seeing here in college football that GMs are going to become prevalent, and GMs could maybe even have more power than head coaches. But overall, I love the move for Oklahoma. I think that Oklahoma right now with Jim Nagy, he's going to identify great talent. He's going to connect with the coaching staff. Just hearing him in that press conference, it's pretty wild that no NFL teams were that interested in bringing in Jim Nagy as an NFL general manager. You saw what the outsider approach did for John Lynch. You saw even Les Snead. So I think that Jim Nagy would fit great as an NFL general manager. But he ends up now going to Oklahoma, and guess what? You even have more power going to Oklahoma. You have more power to build a roster than you do in the NFL, because you can literally, you have transfer portal, you have high school seniors, you have a lot more avenues. Every player is theoretically could find so many quarterbacks, so many running backs. You can build your entire team. The high school pool is so much deeper than the NFL draft, deeper than NFL free agency. You're stuck with a salary cap, where in college you have NIL and you can spend, and you can pretty much, always look for transfers. And if a player's not doing well, you're not, you don't have a contract with said player. So you can move on from players in college like you can't with the NFL. So I think from a roster constructing perspective, college football is where it's at. And if I were a GM or even the coach, I would love to be a part of recruiting, high school and transfer portal guys and building a roster out in college rather than the NFL. If you're stuck with a bad quarterback situation like Cleveland, if you're Atlanta, even New Orleans, if you're under the cap, you're just stuck, sometimes straddled with bad contracts and you don't have flexibility. If Jim Nagy were to take over the Dallas Cowboys as a GM, you're straddled with those contracts, where in college football, you can break everything apart, restart real fresh, and immediately, bam, switch it up. And within a year, you can flip it incredibly quickly in college football. We saw that with BYU. We saw that with Arizona State. SMU's recruiting has gotten a ton better. This is such a tumultuous time in terms of you don't know who's going to have big NIL and who can make that big leap. You saw Texas Tech with their transfer portal class. So Ole Miss is now a huge player in recruiting, where in the past they weren't a staple of the top 5 or top 10 in terms of transfer portal or regular recruiting. So Jim Nagy, love the hire for Oklahoma. Really fascinated to see how this works, what players he decides to bring in, how he's going to report to the fans, to the head coach, to see how the relationship's going to work out. It is a very changing landscape, or I should say that the landscape is ever moving in college football.